Good evening, everyone, and welcome to LAPL's Juneteenth Celebration. My name is Janae Brown. I am the Director of Emerging Technologies and Collections here at LA Public Library. I also serve as the Library Department's Racial Equity Officer, and I am a member of Los Angeles Public Library's Equity Action Board, as well as Changing Tones, our organizations that are dedicated to improving um, race and racism in the city of Los Angeles. What is REAB, or LAPL's Racial Equity Action Board? In response to Mayor Garcetti's Executive Director number 27 in December 2020, the Racial Equity Advisory Board, which later became the Racial Equity Action Board, was established. We are committed to a process of creating, sustaining, and advocating for anti racist policies and procedures within the Los Angeles Public Library for Blacks and people of color. Our goal is to create an equitable and inclusive space for everyone. Today, we are celebrating the anniversary of the emancipation of African Americans from slavery. Juneteenth commemorates the date, June 19th, 1865, when thousands of enslaved men and women in Texas finally learned they had been freed. Juneteenth celebrates the day Black communities in Texas and now across the United States remember their enduring fight for freedom and celebrate their culture and connection through shared history. Today, the Los Angeles Public Library Racial Equity Action Board to resist, invites you to celebrate resistance, resilience, and Black joy. Now, I'd like to introduce today's esteemed panelists. I'll begin with Malika C. Billups. Malika Billups serves as Assistant City Administrative Officer in the Office of City Administrative Office. Her areas of oversight include the Employee Relations Division and the newly established Equity, Performance Management, and Innovation Division. Ms. Billups previously served as the City of Los Angeles's Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer, where she established the Office of Workplace Equity within the Personnel Department. There, she managed the city's equity investigations, led efforts to develop the city's first workplace equity policies and enforcement procedures, and citywide diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Before she transitioned to human capital work, Ms. Billups was a practicing employment attorney representing public and private agencies in litigation defense and providing legal advice, counsel, and training. Ms. Billups graduated cum laude from Spelman College with a BA in Child Development, received her JD from Loyola Law School in Los Angeles, and earned a certification in Strategic Human Resources Leadership and Diversity and Inclusion for HR from Cornell University. Thank you, Malika Billups, for being with us today.
Thank you.
Los Angeles Superior Court Presiding Judge Eric C. Taylor. Judge Eric C. Taylor became the 71st presiding judge of the Los Angeles Superior Court on January 1st, 2021. He has led the nation's largest trial court through the COVID-19 pandemic. Judge Taylor has developed the court's remote platform to expand access to 10 million court users and laid the foundation for LA's new court construction and funding. Judge Taylor has developed a lasting legacy of fairness and inclusion on the bench and in law practice. He co-created LA's judicial mentoring program to cultivate diverse judicial candidates. That program has been replicated throughout California and is spreading nationally. He also created the court's Diversity and Inclusion Working Group, which has amended the court's local rules to allow less experienced and historically underrepresented groups greater opportunities to gain experience. Co-chaired by Judge Taylor, the working group has sponsored educational programs and informational series with prominent bar groups that seek to cultivate the best and brightest legal talent by providing opportunities for all. In 2003, Judge Taylor was elected president of the California Judges Association, CJA, after serving on its board for 2 years. In 2015, he became the first judge to be elected for a second term as president of CJA. Judge Taylor holds a JD from the University of Virginia School of Law and a BA from Dartmouth College. He has taught as an adjunct professor at Loyola Marymount University since 2013. Thank you so much for joining us, Judge Eric Taylor.
Thank you.
We are going to jump right into our questions. We only have an hour, which we got about 50 more minutes left. So we will start with the first question that we have to open this discussion. And I will begin with, I'll start by saying that I first learned about Juneteenth when I was about 10 years old. And I think on television, there must have been a celebration that was telecast, maybe even from Texas. I don't recall if it was here. And I remember asking my mother, like, what is Juneteenth and what is this about? And my mother was born in Texarkana, Arkansas, which is on the border of Texas and Arkansas. It's funny because her brothers were born in Texas because they were born at home or in the hospital, and she was born at home. But she explained to me that on June 19th, 1865, enslaved people, our ancestors, were the last to learn of their freedom from bondage, and that it had been to about 2.5 years prior that the Emancipation Proclamation was signed by Lincoln. And I recall thinking, like, that's unfair. Like, what took them so long to let them know that? And I just began to ask her a series of questions of why. Like, I was that child, always wanting to understand the meaning behind an action. And so I will ask you all, when was the first time you learned about Juneteenth? Was it at school? Was it at home? And do you remember how it was celebrated when you were growing up?
Malika, you want to start?
Yeah, I can start. I think it's an interesting question because I personally, honestly, can't think of a time that I didn't know about the Juneteenth holiday. For me, it's like asking, when did you first learn about the 4th of July? I couldn't tell you a specific moment, but it's something that I certainly learned about, probably like you, early on in life, probably sometime in elementary school. And I was aware that it was celebrated in sort of limited ways. I mean, I knew it wasn't something that was nationally celebrated, but I think within the Black culture, I knew people who at least recognized it. But I wouldn't say that I grew up celebrating it, but I grew up acknowledging, that, oh, it's Juneteenth, it's June 19th. This is the day. This was an important day in Black history. So I will say I am happy that now I feel like, at least my experience is that it is something that is celebrated because I think it's worthy of celebration. But that transition to celebration from acknowledgement is new for me.
Okay. Judge Taylor.
I'm going to show my age a little bit. When I was growing up, I didn't know anything about Juneteenth. And I mean, we were still trying to fight and protest to have schools divest from South Africa, and trying to get more people enrolled in schools. And there was no diversity. It was there were just a few of us sprinkled around campuses, and things were a lot different. I mean, we didn't even have a Dr. King holiday or birthday. We were protesting to get recognition for Dr. King. And so it was something I heard about over the years, but didn't grow up recognizing, just sort of hearing about. And then it seemed to gather momentum, especially of late with Black Lives Matter movement. and now here we are. I mean, there's a lot of social change going on right now. But Juneteenth is something that I started learning about maybe when I first heard about it, I don't know, 15 years ago. I sort of said, oh, okay, that's a nice idea. And then, and some people were celebrating or acknowledging it, but it really wasn't. I never thought it would get to this point, to be honest with you. And like it happened with light speed in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good segue into our next question, because we're going to talk about how important is Juneteenth becoming a federal holiday and most recently a paid city holiday. And what does this recognition mean for Black communities?
Yeah. So you want me to go first on this
I was
one?
going to say,
Yes.
it just segues nicely from what you were just talking about.
Okay, and I didn't actually say in the beginning, like, thanks for having us. This is
Yes.
this is really neat that you're putting this on, and it's so important to the community, especially to younger people who are listening in, because it sounds like it's going to be more like a history lesson for me. I'm going to be 60 soon, so I'm the old guy on the block right now. But how important is it becoming a federal holiday and recently a city holiday? It's so new that it's not a state holiday yet. And we're California, so the courts are still open on Juneteenth. They were open on Monday, and I think there's legislation now, an assembly bill that is under consideration. I think some of the delay has been because of the cost. I mean, every time we put a holiday in, there's a cost factor. I think in the county, I heard it was like $42 million, something like that, because you pay people to be off. And so for the court system, I'm sure it'll be, after the state passes it and we're state courts, it'll start to trickle down. But, it's, it is important because I think, it's about healing. It's about recognition of historical wrongs. It's about inclusion of our history in American history as more of a commonplace piece of that fabric. So I think it's extremely important that it's a federal holiday, and but there's a lot of work to do. I mean, we can have holidays galore and have recognition, but I think there's a lot of repair to be made to get people of color, but specifically with this holiday, it recognizes that Black people were enslaved, and they were enslaved for a long time. And that had a lasting impact on families, on our self-esteem, our self-understanding about where we came from. There are a lot of immigrants who come here. They know exactly where they came from. Some of them still have family and homes and property in other places, and they come here for a different dream. But African Americans, for the most part, were brought here against their will and mistreated. Families were split up. We were dehumanized. And that continued on. That tradition continued on. It was institutionalized in laws and Jim Crow. And so, I had parents my father couldn't go to college where he wanted to go. And, I've had grandparents who had to go to segregated schools and they couldn't go to school. So, the impact of it is that, we're African Americans start out in a different place. We don't have inheritance. I'm the first generation of my family to go to college, first generation to own homes. And I thought I was doing well. And then you look around and you see how much better other families who haven't had those impediments, who haven't had those obstacles, how well they're doing. And so now I think we're seeing a big problem. It's not just racial. It's socioeconomic. It's lack of health services. It's lack of housing. Some people own 20 houses. Some people own nothing. They own a box in the street. And so we have a long way to go. And it's a start. I like holidays; they're great, but there's holidays are just holidays. Real work has to be done, and I think we're going to talk about what we need to do a little bit further in this conversation.
Yes, thank you. Malika, you want to chime in and talk about what does the recognition of Juneteenth mean for Black communities?
I think, well, first, I would certainly say that I second, third, and fourth everything that Judge Taylor just said. I think I can relate in my life experience to a lot of the things that you're saying about not the disconnect from history and things, but this, and as much as a holiday is just a holiday, and I completely agree with that. What I do think of is that the importance of the federal recognition is the idea that now we are recognizing things that are specifically related to Black history. And I know MLK Day is certainly, obviously very much related to Black history, but I think in my impression or my feeling about the civil rights movement was that this was a movement to advance America as a whole. That was, yes, Black people benefited. There's lots of people who benefited from the civil rights movement and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the things that came of those efforts. But when I think about Juneteenth, especially in the context of today and the debates about what critical race theory is and what history really is and what truth is, I think that this is kind of one of the first times that the history of slavery is recognized on a national platform in a way that you kind of can't pretend like it didn't exist, like it didn't happen, like it wasn't occurring the way that it was. And I think that when you think about Juneteenth, and I think about my kids, I have two young kids. I have two daughters that are 4 and 8. I think about what they're learning in school because everyone learns about these holidays
Mm-hmm.
and what the history is and what it comes from. And my kids were going to learn about Juneteenth anyway because they're my kids, and they're also Black kids who live in the city of LA. And I was a Black kid in the city of LA and I learned about it relatively early on. So I feel like they would have picked up on it. But I feel like there's kids out there that are in certain states and regions that would have never had any reason to think about or acknowledge this piece of history because it just doesn't seem to connect to what their experience is. And I think that that is sort of a unique angle that a holiday has, because it's during the summer, so I don't know that anybody's necessarily off school, but it has the opportunity to create that national narrative, which is, I think one tiny yet big, but still tiny step forward in this movement toward creating a more equitable society.
Thank you. Well said.
Mhm.
I had a great uncle, Uncle CG, that I learned recently would never celebrate the 4th of July. He'd always celebrate Juneteenth. And it was primarily because on July 4th, 1776, Black folks were enslaved in this country. So let's talk about the 4th of July. Does the newly recognized federal holiday mean we should reconsider and expand this country's ideals of patriotism? Can Juneteenth and Black liberation be linked to America's core values of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all Americans? Malika,
Ooh, that's
go to you
deep.
first.
I think that that's a big question, and I think that that's something that Black people throughout the country, and throughout history have probably always grappled with this idea of Independence Day, 4th of July, knowing that that was not something for us. I recently, just kind of in my role in the city, I was looking back at like the purpose of government and thinking about like what are we as a city here for, and then I thought, okay, well, let me think about like what is the function that the county serves, like as a public entity, and the function the state serves, and why did the United States create a government in, or like what is its ultimate purpose. And I was looking back at some of those founding documents, and I reread the Declaration of Independence, and I haven't read it since third grade, or fifth grade. It's when we learn the U.S. history, and I was blown away by the hypocrisy written into the Declaration of Independence, because I hadn't read it. I've heard people kind of talk about it, but looking at it myself, and I'm thinking about these ideals that the founding fathers spoke about when they talked about the reason that we needed to be free from the bondage of Great Britain or England and what they did to us. And I'm thinking like at the same time, how can you have these two minds that you're doing the exact same thing? And so I think that concept is something that Black people have been grappling with for a long time, about like, what has it meant for us? What has it meant for, the people, Black people in the United States, who we know that our history comes through that story of bondage and oppression and torture in a lot of regards. And I think that is something that I think we can't take away from the ideals of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I think that honestly is what breeds a lot of frustration and resentment within the community, because we've always felt like we're outsiders, and pretending like this history didn't happen to our ancestors, because the vestiges of slavery, I think, are still prominent within our community and within our culture. And not just slavery, but slavery and the things that happened after it. Um, I think I don't know that I think that we can. I don't know that we need to necessarily reconsider, because it sort of is what it is. But I do think that expanding the ideas of what it means to be a patriot and what it means to be American, it does require a lot of sitting with, what does this mean for my culture? What does it mean for me today, as an American? Because I'm as American as, anybody else, who considers themselves American. And I think it's interesting, because Black people have been in America as long as just about anybody else. And I think that is unique to this particular culture, because we were in America with the sort of founders of the government at the same time that they were all here. There's no America the way that it looks without Black people in it. And I think that is something that we have to figure out, like, what does that mean to us? So I don't have a clear answer for that, but just sort of a lot of thoughts about patriotism and being American and where we are today.
Although that was fantastic. You're dropping pearls of wisdom to us. Thank you. Judge Taylor, your response.
Yeah, I think Malek she's brilliant. And again, I want to co-sign on, to what you said. I concur. That's what we say at court. And I was thinking about the answer to this question, at least for me, while she was talking. And I was thinking about the Constitution, because I've had to read that a number of times, and in law school and beyond. And there's a part in there about in order to form a more perfect union,
mm-hmm.
and there's a reason why it says more perfect, because they knew it wasn't perfect.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of put something together that they could agree on at the time, even though some folks were just fine with the way things were. Especially the folks in the South whose constituents were benefiting from the slave trade, and the founding, fathers, if you want to call them that, they, especially Jefferson, and I've read a lot of works about Thomas Jefferson's life. I went to the University of Virginia, so law school, so I spent a lot of time reading and learning about him. He was a slave owner. He was drafter of that inconsistent and contradictory document.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a quote from him about slavery, and he compared it to holding a wolf by the ears. And he said, you can't hold on to it forever, but there's going to be trouble when you let go of it, and it won't be easy. And so I think they knew enough to know that while they were fighting for their freedom, they were holding others in bondage. And the same way that they fought, they were the wolf trying to be freed from Great Britain and from Europe, and to find their place. They knew they were doing ill things to other people, but they didn't do enough quickly enough to avoid injury to our ancestors and lasting injury to us. Should the 4th of July, the meaning of that be expanded and sort of morphed into to June 19? That's an interesting question, and maybe it is a time between the 19th and the 4th. It's not that long a period of time
Mm.
where we start to really reflect uh, on the wrongs, the contradictions, and try to come to the fourth together, understanding what folks have gone through. So I think that's a brilliant question. I'm not sure where that came from, but it's important. I think at some point, we all want what the 4th of July means to some people.
Yeah.
And that's the goal. And if we can start righting some of those wrongs, I mean, we will be a perfect union once we get to the point where everyone has the opportunity to seek liberty, happiness, and all the other gifts granted under the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. So, and the Bill of Rights. I mean, I think it's a great question. I think it's going to take a lot of time.
Mm-hmm. I like that idea of, I think I've heard it too before in the season of celebrating Juneteenth, beginning June 19th, all the way through the 4th of July, and having that dedicated time for study and learning. So I accept the challenge. I will do so
All right.
this year.
Right.
Okay. So art, music, and literature have been catalysts for social and political change throughout history. Can you share any expression of art that had this kind of impact on your life? And can I say before you all answer that um, I had the great fortune of attending the Juneteenth celebration at the Hollywood Bowl over the weekend, and I love poetry. And Amir Suleiman, just to me, the music was great. Hearing Earth, Wind, and Fire and all the others, Shaka Khan was all fantastic. But I had to shush my neighbors to my right and my left when I heard him recite a poem. And the refrain I remember him saying was, "You will be someone's ancestor. Act accordingly." Um, and so that just still resonates within my soul because he's absolutely right. We all will be someone's ancestors. And what actions are we taking now? And are those who have passed on in the grave um, still being active, more active than we are today? And it just makes you think. So the question is, can you share with us any expression of art that has had an impact on your life? So art, music, literature, whatever you want to discuss. And we'll go to, who do we go to first? Malika?
This is a tricky question for me because I think that art and literature and music are like such a part of my life that it's hard to like pinpoint um, one that ties political change. And I think probably part of it is because this era that we're in now is what feels to me like the first time that I have been in an era of rapid political change. I turned 40 last year. So born in the early 80s, and there was, certainly there was some political change, but like this is very different. I mean, this obviously is sort of going to be my generation's, or my, this is my civil rights movement. And what it brings me to is just how culture has shifted and how creativity is both a driver and a result of political movements. And I think about art that we see on like street art. I think about literature that's not just in the written form. I think about all the podcasts that people are, sharing, where people are expressing themselves. I'm thinking about the sort of written movements that I see in social media, where people are sharing ideas and moving and driving that. And I think it's all a form. And obviously there's music, there are albums that are coming out, there's physical art. And I'm just thinking about how political change and creativity, they change, with time. And so I don't know if there is any particular expression of art that has had, this kind of impact on my life, but I'm looking at all of it and I'm seeing this change, and I am blown away and fascinated by it and how it's helping us tell this story and move this narrative of, whether it's everything, Black Lives Matter, anything that's really this, I don't know, this pocket of growth that the country is going through, growth and friction, because certainly we all probably agree that there is no growth without some, pain and some friction and some drama. And I think that's all kind of part of the expression, and we see it. So that's how I'd answer the question.
Yeah. And I would say there was something that Malika said about street art. And I mean, some of the murals in Los Angeles, and we're really fortunate to have the type of art that we've had here, because the weather is the way it is. You don't see a lot of these beautiful, colorful murals. They're Latin African murals in our community. Some of them are just pieces, they're works of art that should be maintained, and the elements get to them, graffiti gets to them, and then they're gone. There was a mural on the Harbor Freeway that I used to pass by when I went to work every day back in the 80s when Malika was born. It was a beautiful a mural about the campesinos, about farm workers, and the colors were rich and beautiful. And over the years, 5 years went by, I started to see graffiti sort of take over, and I wish that someone had preserved it someplace, just a picture of it. But I travel around now and see like these murals, and they're the backdrop for the human suffering, that landscape. And there's a powerful mural downtown by Olvera Street, and it's a picture. It looks like Frida Kahlo. Yeah.
Frida Kahlo.
Yeah. It's a mural. It looks like it's of her, but then I looked at it more closely, and it looks like Lady Liberty. Yeah, sort of a crown around her head, but then right in front of it, and I took a picture of it. And if I had the time, we should do a whole program on murals in LA. But yeah, there were homeless people sleeping on the freeway overpass right in front of me, and right behind I saw this mural, and it was almost like she was presiding over this human suffering landscape. And and it just left it left an impression in me about where we are and what we could be. And so art makes you think, it makes you grow, where you would just go to your day-to-day life just taking care of business, and then not have the time that some of the young people have in school to look at art and walk around and have that sort of free time to learn. You can find it there. And I mentioned to you at the beginning, what music and art has done. I mean, yeah, music has been the source of change, the catalyst for change throughout time. In the 60s, there were a lot of those freedom songs, and Bob Dylan had his time, and Sly and the Family Stone, were talking about everyday people, and and Larry Graham was talking about hair, and about afros, and James Brown was don't give me anything, open the door, I get it myself. And had the first song that I ever thought about being black and proud. It was called Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. That we had never heard that kind of music before, and it made us all get up and want to be black. It made you feel proud, even though there was a lot of oppression still happening. And but it was, there's songs of defiance and hope. And then I mentioned the march to get a King holiday, and I pulled this up on Spotify. Okay, this is before there was a Dr. King holiday, and he was, we were anticipating that we were going to get a holiday, and so this is part of the movement, and artists can play a big role and can contribute to change. So artists are hidden gems. You're on mute, I think.
Thank you for telling me. During the last few years, government agencies have tried to take effective action toward racial equity. In your current role, you have the ability to achieve long term impact. Could you share with us what you're working on and what you want to achieve?
Well, I
Can't
think
recall who would go.
Okay, I can start. So
Okay.
I'm in a new role in the city that I'm really excited about, but it's going to take a lot of time to get the project moving that I really want to move. So I'm in the city administrative officer's office, and the CAO has a lot of responsibility within the city. CAO is the only department that reports directly to both the mayor and to city council. And they act as the advisor in a lot of respects. It used to be called the Office of Research and Administration. I think it was something like that. And they are the ones who do a lot of the research to help the mayor's office and city council decide, what are the policies, what's the information behind it. And we also act as sort of the stewards of the budget, all of the budget analysts and budget analysis goes through the CAO's office that ultimately makes recommendations to the mayor and city council. And so I give that context to explain the reason for my role. So my role in the creation of the Equity Performance Management and Innovation Group is to build equity principles into the way that the city does business, is basically to institutionalize it. And I think one of the most effective ways, two of the most effective ways really, to do that are to do it through the budget process and also through follow-up performance management. If you say that you're going to do something that's going to have this positive impact, on a certain community, did you get it done and did it have the impact? And if it didn't, does something need to be changed? And that doesn't exist right now in the city of Los Angeles. So I'm working with many departments, basically all departments and the political arena within the city of Los Angeles to create structures, identify outcomes that we are endeavoring to achieve. We're working together to identify a specific definition of equity. Like when council member for one district says equity and another district says equity and the mayor says equity, are we talking about the same thing? Because right now people say equity and it's a buzzword, but it doesn't necessarily have one solid meaning that we in the city of Los Angeles agree. This is what it means and this is what our goals are. So I'm working with a group to establish what is that definition and how do we plan to execute it from sort of a citywide strategic platform. So I'm basically working to create that system, to build that system into our budget process so that the departments are aware that they have to identify, not just to check a box and say, oh, this is equity and this is equity, but to really think through what are the impacts, because we're going to have to collect a lot of data and it's going to have to be an ongoing data collection. So those are structures that are going to need to be built into departments, and it will be built into the CAO's office and into the recommendations that we make to the political decision makers within the city. So that's primarily what I'm working on. It's, this is not a 1-year plan. This is something that will take years to implement, and a lot of strategic partnership and a lot of learning from other organizations that have done something similar.
Yeah, very much needed. Looking forward to that. Judge Taylor?
Yeah, well, when I'm not doing my day job, which is, digging out from the pandemic and trying to get our budget straight, one of the things that was really important to me from the beginning was developing programs to build diversity and inclusion. I mean, there's diversity, but inclusion is really the big element, the elephant in the room that we're starting to address more and more in the practice of law and on the bench, because the bench and our bar, they really are. It's first of all, it's a powerful part of our democracy, and to build trust in that system, in the legal system, you really have to have inclusion. People need to see people of color, they need to see women, transgender, gay, lesbian, etc., in positions where they feel like there's buy-in, buy-in from that legal community in their cause and in their importance. So, I grew up in the Crenshaw district. They used to call my neighborhood the jungle back in the day. I don't know what they call it now. But I didn't have a lot. We didn't have a car when I was growing up. I mean, I didn't see the beach, I think, till I was in like sixth grade or something. And even though it wasn't that far away, and in the black community was coming out of the Watts riots from the '60s. So it was sort of a different time. But one thing that I knew coming out, or I learned coming out of it, is that I didn't have the opportunities that other people had, and that I didn't have access to people in power, people in the know. That was more based on your good fortune and often on your race and your gender. And so I told myself when I got into a position of influence like now, that I would build I'd bring change. I didn't have a lot of mentors. I had a few, and they were great. Alan Broussard, who was in the California Supreme Court, my father, my mother, my family, some other people, Terry Hatter, who's a district court judge. These people that I sort of stumbled across, who did help me, but that was fortuitous. And there weren't many people. I mean, they were mentors to everybody in the Black community, because everybody was coming to them. There were very few of them. So a group of us got together, three of us, Judge Kevin Brazil, myself, and Judge Victor Wright. We were all attorneys then. And we started to build on the concept that we'd already been living in the legal community. We were all helping each other. The ones that didn't have mentors, that weren't a part of that traditional crowd, were telling each other about jobs. We're giving each other advice. It's like the blind leading the blind, but at least we knew we could trust each other. And I got lucky. And when I was appointed first, when I was 35, I was appointed 25 years ago to the bench. Kevin Brazil wanted to be a judge. I always knew that. And I gave him all of my contacts, and I took him to Sacramento with me, introduced him to everybody that I had met, got his application together. And a couple of years later, he was a judge. And then we had to twist Victor Wright's arm and do the same thing with him. But with him, it was a lot faster. And we started doing it like a domino, doing it with more and more people. When I got to the presiding judge's suite, I decided to put together programs that would sort of address this issue, to give folks who aren't typically the ones that the partners at law firms would take to court with them and show around and have over to dinner. I didn't get a lot of that. So I wanted to try to level the playing field. You mentioned the judicial mentoring program. Started at the beginning of my term, and I put that together with Judge Brazil, with the governor, and Judge Brazil, by the way, was the first Black presiding judge, and I was his assistant presiding judge. We had to back each other, so I wanted to be in that suite with him. And so we put together this program to remove the mystique from folks who made their way to the bench, to provide that information to everybody, to provide mentors to everyone who wanted one. And so we have 100 judges in LA so far, and over 200 mentoring relationships built. Some of the judges are taking on 2 and 3 people. And it's been really successful, so much so that the governor wanted to take what we started in LA, and he saw that we were successful. He took that through the appointment secretary, Luis Cespedes, and replicated it throughout the state. And now it is moving to other states, New Jersey, Delaware, Texas, Colorado. We're looking at it too. So it's really catching on. It is an extremely successful program. At least two people that I know of have become judges based on that program,
Wow.
and it's open to everyone. But the people that run to us are the ones who typically don't have access. So it's meant to really focus on those people, but to be open to everyone, because I still believe that that's the kind of nation that we want. Um, and the other programs from the Diversity and Inclusion Working Group that I started and I co-chair, we put on programs with Public Counsel, with the LA County Bar, with some of the other prominent bar groups, to put on education-based programs so that people learn how to pick a jury. They hear these programs are put on by some of the most successful lawyers in the country because they want to give their time because they believe in it. And we're putting those so they're free and available to everyone on our website after we produce them and put them out there live. The first program had 1,650 registrants, which is shocking. I mean, it is mind blowing that many people wanted to be a part of that, and they sat for 2.5 hours and watched how to pick a jury. They heard from jury consultants. The next one will come out actually in 2 days on Thursday. It's a lunch program. It's on opening statements, and we put a diverse group of lawyers in there so people see good role models and they can see that we can all do it. And so, I'm really proud of these programs. I'm really proud of the change that we're bringing, and so that's what we're doing on my court. We're doing a lot more than that, and we don't have time to talk about it all. But I want, things have to change. The whole point is to have the cream rise to the top. So that's what we're trying to do.
Love it. That was our final question. Thank you both for this wonderful conversation on the significance of Juneteenth. You are both awesome activists. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your excellence. I see both of you, and what you're doing is beautiful. So now we're going to open it up for Q&A from the audience. And before I do that, I want to acknowledge the opening song that was played. We lifted that from the Museum of Black Joy. The video quilt was by Andrea Walls, and the music was Sweet By and by Elizabeth Cotton. And I hope that gave time for me to, I don't know, I'm going to have someone tell me how to get to the questions. Okay. So Ann Patel is asking, what about the school curriculum? How does that have to change?
I think I'm not in the world of education now, but I was a teacher, and I was a child development major in college, and I went to and I taught fourth grade at 74th Street Elementary School for a couple of years before I went to law school. And when I think about curriculum, I'm thinking about broadly in the national curriculum, and I think realistically, the discussion about curriculum is happening right now. As we're talking about critical race theory and what it means and what it is and what it isn't, and talking about how to incorporate aspects of impact on the Black community into U.S. history that is taught in some schools and isn't taught in other schools, and recognizing that there are states that are passing legislation to keep certain aspects of curriculum outside of the school and somewhere else. I think that is part of where we are as a nation, is we are in the midst of this sort of cultural struggle about identity, about history, about culture, and these types of struggles, I imagine, will take time. I think for me, in my opinion, it is important to teach history. It is certainly also important to teach history in the context of how it impacts us today, and how we can move the needle forward toward positivity and not necessarily dwell on blame. I think there's a lot of fear associated with the debates about critical race theory, that it's associated with blame and blaming people today for a history, of ills against various communities. It's not just the Black community, but it's lots of different communities. So I think that's what I would say. I am hoping that the curriculum of the U.S. Sort of pedagogy moves toward a full scope of truth about history. But I think that is in legal systems right now. It is within the culture that will work itself out. There are political, movements that will work itself out. And so I think it does have to change, and I think it will.
Judge Taylor, anything to add?
I mean, I don't have much to add to that. I think that I mean, when I was growing up, we learned about slavery. It was part of American history, and it was like 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And so having teaching history so that we don't repeat history is really important in talking about how things happen and then what impact they have. I mean, I think we need to have a bigger discussion about the lasting impact to help cure some of the divide between us.
Mm-hmm.
And look, I just think we need to be more honest all around about how we teach and what we teach. I mean, ultimately, we want to be a union of people working together, because there are a lot of enemies outside of us that we need to worry about. One of those being the environment, the planet that we live on. We need to be fighting together, so finding ways to heal within through education, I think, is great, and it gives to give kids a chance to talk to each other as they're developing, so they don't have the same divided impression that I had when I grew up. I mean, and when I was in college, we had the black table and there was a white table and everybody was sitting apart, and we need to start learning together.
I love that. And that learning together can start at the public library, right? So it's been called the People's University. Um, we have a wealth of information. I'm would like to remind the audience to also check out our book list for Juneteenth. We have book lists on our website, lapl.org, for both children and adults. And just go in and say hi to the library staff, and discover and open your mind to new possibilities. Are there any more questions? I'm waiting for our behind the scenes tech. Mary Howd, I'm a white woman who dearly wants to learn and understand the core issues of the Black community. I'm so grateful for discussions such as this. When we know better, we do better. Absolutely. Thank you for that comment. Another comment is, I'm Mexican American and my two sons attended Kappa League and spent many Sundays at the Kappa Castle. My sons, the only two Latinos, were embraced and welcomed by the Kappa Alpha Psi leaders. Absolutely. How can Juneteenth become a national holiday? Am I reading this correctly? How can Juneteenth become a national holiday? It would be great.
Let's make that happen.
Let's make that
We did it.
We did it.
Look at what we were able to achieve in this conversation.
Powerhouse.
We're so successful. You know what? But one thing, as much as it's a national holiday, I think that Judge Taylor, you made a point that it's still new, and a lot of people, it hasn't impacted a lot of people because people associate holidays with days off. And the city of Los Angeles recently made this past Juneteenth, the first Juneteenth that was celebrated, as a holiday. I'm very grateful for that change. But you're right, the state hasn't made it, so it's going to take some time for the impact of the national holiday to actually roll itself out, because not everybody has Juneteenth off or really gets that opportunity. And I don't know that there's any one place that has control over whether or not the holiday is observed by specific employers. So there's no real way that we can control that. But what we can do, to make it a national holiday is talk to people, educate ourselves about the history of it, the meaning of it, and to acknowledge it, especially during this period of study of
Yes.
the meaning of independence during this 2 weeks that we have.
Absolutely. What a nice way to end our conversation. I'm sorry,
No,
presiding Judge
I
Taylor.
think we're all going to remember this conversation as a conversation that began the week of self-reflection between
Yes.
Juneteenth and the 4th of
And 4th
July.
of July.
Let's
Yep.
make that happen.
Let's make that happen. I'm game. I'm in.
Me too.
Okay, this has been a wonderful discussion. Again, thank you, Malika Billups, presiding judge Eric Taylor, for your time, your words of wisdom, your pearls of wisdom. Thank you so much for joining this program produced by Los Angeles Public Library. I do want to take a moment to acknowledge my fellow Racial Equity Action Board members, particularly Tatiana Ortiz Cordenero. Judge Taylor, you mentioned about the questions being great. We owe that to Tatiana for putting together the questions for us today. And I want to just thank all of the other board members as well and our institution for its support. And we will close out with another song that is on the Museum of Black Joy's website. And this is Go Down Moses by Moms Mabley.
When Moses was in Egypt land, he said, let my people go. They were pressed so hard until they couldn't stand. He said, let my people go. He said, go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land, and tell Pharaoh to let my people go. Thus spoke the Lord, oh Moses said, let my people go. Unless I'll strike your firstborn dead, let my people go. He said, go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land, and tell Pharaoh I said to let my people go, because I love them. Let my people go. They my chosen people. Let my people go. Tell them what I said. Let my people go. Deep river, my home is over Jordan. Deep river, Lord, I wanna cross over into campground. So go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land, and tell old Pharaoh to let my people go.
Mom's Mabley, Mom's Mabley. Dear old mom, worldwide internationally known, Mom's Mabley. Everybody come and star, Mom's Mabley. Musical star, Mom's Mabley.